la conferencia que dictará el maestro Troy Conrad Terrian. Aquí tenemos un breve perfil de su trayectoria.
Troy Conrad Terrian se hizo acreedor de la medalla del Instituto Americano de Arquitectos y ganó la beca Goodman de Arquitectura. Es socio fundador de The Himmler, organización enfocada al análisis interdisciplinario de la arquitectura, las ciencias sociales, la tecnología digital y la comunicación para proveer soluciones que generen nuevas estrategias y diseño. A lo largo de su carrera, ha trabajado como técnico creativo para firmas como Bruce Mau Design, estudio interdisciplinario de diseño con sede en Toronto y Nueva York, y donde se inclinó por investigar la interacción entre el hombre y la tecnología, así como por la realización de diversos proyectos arquitectónicos en ciudades como Londres, París y Nueva York. Actualmente se desempeña como arquitecto en jefe de Cloud Communication Software para la Escuela de Arquitectura, Planeación y Preservación de la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York, en donde se encarga de desarrollar y probar nuevos paradigmas ligados a la tecnología, movilidad y diseño. Dicho programa cuenta con una colaboración de Audi of America e investiga la relación entre la ciudad y el continuo movimiento de la misma con ayuda de tecnologías emergentes. Como crítico, ha publicado artículos y ensayos en revistas especializadas como Hodge, Bonn y San Rocco, entre otras, y ha diseñado exposiciones para importantes instituciones de Europa y Norteamérica, entre las que destacan el Museo de Arte Moderno de la ciudad de Nueva York, MoMA, y el Centro Canadiense para la Arquitectura. Damas y caballeros, con ustedes, Troy Conrad Terrian.
Esta conferencia será dictada en un idioma que no es castellano, así que estoy notando que algunas personas ya fueron por su kit electrónico para tener la traducción simultánea de esta conferencia sin que constituya una estampida. Por favor, entiendo que algunos irán para tener su kit electrónico y poder seguir esta conferencia. Damos la bienvenida pues a nuestro ponente. Adelante, por favor.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start by taking your picture. I've had my picture taken a lot this week. And this is really kind of the most spectacular view in the house, which is a true testament to the team at InfoNFE. You've put together a really, really world-class conference. And so I just want to start by thanking Alejandro. Really the vision that you've shared with me over the last couple of days and the ability that you have in your position to actually make real change in the world is incredibly inspiring, as is the team that you've put together. So with Carlos, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and the rest of your team this week. I don't speak Spanish, I'm very sorry, which also means I don't understand Spanish, so I don't know what was just said about me. I hope the word architect was used, I'm not sure if it was. I'm kind of a strange architect. In America, I'd be sued for calling myself an architect, but I'm wearing all black tonight to kind of try to trick you into thinking I might be an architect. I actually started by studying software engineering back in the late 1990s. And during the time of my studies, I went down to San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which at the time was the kind of the epicenter of technology, this idea of the dot-com era, where there was this height of techno-optimism. People thought that technology could radically change the world. And this is why I got into it. And then I got down there, and 4 months later, the bubble popped. It felt like the world imploded around me, and I had to completely rethink what I was going to do in my life. So I came back and finished my studies, and then I went directly to architecture school. It was in architecture school that I realized that it was really architects that are defined by their optimism. And so, following architecture school, to pay for the debt that I had accrued as an architecture student, I took a job in advertising. as a creative technologist, using my technology skills to pay for my architecture education. And then I had the great fortune to be in conversation with the dean at the Architecture School of Columbia, where I studied, Mark Wigley. And he offered me the opportunity to come back to the school after I was working in advertising and try to think through how digital communications could completely change the way that an architecture school operated. And if I was obsessed with being an architect, then to be inside of the space that creates architects was an opportunity I couldn't miss. The other opportunity I couldn't miss came up literally a week before I started that job, and that was an opportunity to start a company with one of my best friends. So Chris Barley and I started a company called Terry and Barley, based around a project that was actually with Columbia University that I'll show near the end of the presentation, literally on the same day that I started working at the school. Since my role at the school is as an adjunct professor of architecture, and recently I co-founded a new lab called the Architecture Online Lab. And I'm not really going to talk about our work. What I'd rather do is in a way that I was completely inspired by Alejandro Aravena the other night, really try to work through an argument, and then to kind of show some examples to kind of back it up. And I'm actually going to be probably much more bombastic and grandiose than I may have been otherwise if it wasn't for Derek Dickercove earlier, who really laid the framework, I think, for me to be able to make some claims that otherwise I might not be able to make. So I'd like to talk about turning architecture on. And it's coming from my position living in New York and working in between New York and San Francisco. And so really this is a kind of test, because as you know better than anyone, New York City is a 19th century city. If anything, Mexico City is the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. If anything, Mexico is the place where the 21st century city is going to be born. And so in New York, we're really trying to figure out how do we cope in a world where New York is no longer this idea of a city. And one of the ways that we're looking at it is through technology. So I'm going to start with this story. In 1993, the World Wide Web was born. Web pages, web browsers, and so on. It was born in Geneva, and it was born by researchers. In 1994, this guy, Marc Andreessen, started the world's first commercial web browser company. It was called Netscape. Maybe you had Netscape. In 1995, the company went public, and overnight, that company was worth $2.9 billion with a B. I'm not sure what it is in Spanish. $2.9 billion company overnight by 1995. By 1999, he had sold the company, but he basically became the beginning of this new era of the idea that technology can kind of change the world through the internet. In 2009, he kind of re-emerged in the world. He started a venture capital firm with Ben Horowitz, who's on the right, and by 2011, he was kind of one of the most important people in the tech world. He was telling us what the future would be. And what he was saying was that software is eating the world. In 2011, he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, and this is what he said. Being a former software engineer and a kind of strange architect, this sentence really spoke to me, because of course software was where I came from, and the world was where I thought I was. So I wanted to try to unpack it. What was he talking about when he said software is eating the world? Well, he was talking about Amazon.com. Amazon.com, of course, is the online web company where you can buy books over the internet, which means you don't have to go to bookstores anymore. In 2011, Amazon.com was going through the roof, and I don't know if you can see on the graph, but it's actually at the beginning of 2009 that they start to climb, which was precisely the time that we thought we were supposed to be in crisis. He was also talking about Netflix. Netflix, you can also order something over the internet, and this was videos, DVDs. Netflix also has been on a kind of momentous climb, and in fact it's gone even higher since. And of course Apple, the iTunes store, right? In 2011, 60% of global music sales went through the iTunes store. So what happens to all the other stores in the world, the physical bricks and mortar stores? Well, they start to look like this. So Borders Bookstore is a massive book chain in America, and it went bankrupt. This is kind of what it looked like near the end. You can, for the translators, sorry, no bathrooms, try Amazon.com. Blockbuster Video, one of the biggest video chains in America, store closing. This is what it looked like. HMV, music store. Thanks to iTunes, looks like that. But this isn't anything new. I mean, the idea that architecture suffers when we go through revolutionary change is perhaps one of the fundamental ideas of architecture. Storming the Bastille in Paris in the First Revolution, they had to tear down the prison as a way to carry out the revolutionary kind of charge. Pulling down the Berlin Wall in 1989. Toppling monuments like Saddam Hussein in 2003. The Taliban removing a 2,000-year-old Buddha statue in Afghanistan. And of course, in Greece, only just over a year ago, burning buildings in the street as a response to austerity measures. So it's this idea that architecture needs to be victimized every time we want change to happen, because architecture, I would argue, is the cultural avatar for permanence. Architecture is that thing that's meant to be stable. It's meant to outlast us. It's meant to hold those ideals that we believe until the moment that we change our ideals, and then we have to disable that architecture and build a new architecture in its place. But I would argue that this change, the change that Marc Andreessen's talking about, software eating the world, is a different kind of change. What he says when he means software is eating the world is he means that online is eating offline. Right now, 35.6% of the world is online. That's 2.5 billion people, which percentage-wise doesn't seem like a lot. But the rate of change is incredible. So the internet is growing at roughly the same speed as AM radio and television grew earlier in the century, but mobile phones are growing at a rate that we've actually never seen before in technology. So this is what's called the JIT curve. It was discovered in the 1960s, and it's the idea that you can relate teledensity, which means how many phones there are in a country, to its GDP. So if you have low GDP, which means basically a poor country, you won't have very many phones. And for over 40 years, this curve was a kind of straight line. You have more phones if you have more money. In 2007, the study was redone, and it started to look a bit more scrambled. By now, 2012 rather, a year ago, of the world's 6 billion mobile phones for 7 billion people, 73% of them are in the developing world. And they only account for 20% of the world's GDP. So there's a total flip in the way that we understand the way that technology spreads throughout the world. This graph, which you can barely read, basically is showing that not only are mobile phones moving faster than any technology, the smartphone is actually moving faster than any technology, even mobile phones. The smartphone means internet. So the world is going online.